the history of Hollywood's greatest charmer, until she discovered it was Dean Martin, the enigma of the charmer. Eleanor Vance, at 28, possessed the kind of sharp intellect and relentless curiosity that made her a rising star at Silver Screen Quarterly. Her office, a cramped but cozy space overlooking the bustling streets of downtown Los Angeles, was usually a whirlwind of half-read biographies, dog-eared scripts, and the faint scent of stale coffee. Today, however, a single, pristine manila folder lay open on her desk, its contents both tantalizing and frustrating. Hollywood's greatest charmer, the assignment read, scrawled in her editor's notoriously illegible hand. Deep dive. Uncover the legend. Who was he, really? Eleanor sighed, pushing a stray strand of auburn hair from her eyes. The concept wasn't new. For decades, whispers had circulated through the industry about a figure whose charisma was so potent, so utterly effortless, that it transcended mere celebrity. He wasn't the most handsome, nor the most talented in any single discipline, but he possessed an indefinable magnetism that drew everyone into his orbit. Directors swore he could salvage a failing scene with a single glance. Actresses confessed to falling under his spell with just a smile. Studio executives, usually ruthless and calculating, found themselves inexplicably agreeing to his most outlandish demands. The problem? No one ever named him. He was simply the charmer. A collective memory, a shared myth, a ghost of Hollywood's golden age. Eleanor had initially dismissed it as industry hyperbole, another embellished tale from a town built on illusion. But her editor, a grizzled veteran named Arthur Finch who had seen more than his fair share of Tinseltown's true magic, insisted it was real. He wasn't just charming, Eleanor. Arthur had rumbled, his voice like gravel. He was charm itself. It wasn't an act, it was his essence. And that's why no one could ever quite pin him down. He was too fluid, too natural, like trying to catch smoke. Eleanor's initial research yielded little beyond the anecdotal. She spent days poring over old fan magazines, studio press releases, and early film critiques. She found countless references to an unnamed star who could light up a room, possess an irresistible allure, or make everyone feel like the most important person in the world. But never a name. It was as if the industry had conspired to keep his identity a secret, or perhaps, more accurately, had simply failed to articulate it. She started with the obvious candidates. Cary Grant, too polished, too overtly debonair. Clark Gable, too rugged, too much of a leading man. Frank Sinatra, too intense, too demanding of attention. The charmer, as described, seemed to operate on a different frequency. His charm wasn't about grand gestures or dazzling performances. It was subtle, pervasive, almost subliminal. Eleanor interviewed retired publicists, now living quiet lives in Beverly Hills bungalows, their memories as faded as their once vibrant photographs. Oh, him. One elderly woman, a former studio PR guru named Evelyn Hayes, had chuckled, a faraway look in her eyes. He was something else. You'd be in a room with a dozen movie stars, and he'd walk in, and suddenly, everyone else just dimmed. Not because he tried to outshine them, but because he simply was brighter, and he never seemed to notice it himself, which made it all the more potent. Another, a former assistant director, recalled a particularly difficult shoot. The lead actress was throwing a fit, the director was tearing his hair out, and the crew was ready to walk off. Then he just strolled onto the set, humming a little tune, offered the actress a perfectly timed, self-deprecating joke, and suddenly, everyone was laughing. The tension just evaporated. He didn't solve the problem, he just made it irrelevant. Eleanor meticulously cataloged these accounts, searching for patterns, for a common thread that might lead her to a name. The charmer was consistently described as effortlessly cool, never seemed to break a sweat, always composed. Witty, but never cruel. His humor was light, often at his own expense, and disarmed rather than offended. Magnetic, yet approachable. Despite his star power, he made everyone feel at ease. Talented, but understated. His abilities were undeniable, but he never flaunted them. A lover of life's simple pleasures, often associated with good food, good company, and a relaxed atmosphere. The more she researched, the more Eleanor felt a strange pull. This wasn't just a journalistic assignment. It was an archaeological dig into the very soul of Hollywood. The charmer wasn't just a person. He was an archetype, a living embodiment of a certain kind of effortless grace that seemed to have vanished from the modern celebrity landscape. She spent late nights in the silver screen quarterly archives, surrounded by dusty film reels and brittle newspaper clippings. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and forgotten dreams. She felt like a detective, sifting through fragments of a long-lost puzzle. The clues were there, she was sure of it, hidden in plain sight, obscured by the very brilliance they described. One evening, as the city lights twinkled outside her window, Eleanor stumbled upon a faded photograph. It showed a group of stars at a charity event in the late 1950s. In the background, slightly out of focus, was a man leaning against a wall, a cigarette dangling casually from his fingers, a faint, knowing smile playing on his lips. He wasn't the center of attention, but her eyes were drawn to him nonetheless. There was an aura about him, a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate even from the grainy image. "Who are you?" Eleanor whispered to the photograph, a shiver running down her spine. The mystery of Hollywood's greatest charmer was beginning to consume her, transforming from a mere assignment into a personal quest. She knew she was on the verge of something significant, something that would redefine her understanding of Hollywood's golden age. The journey had just begun, and the enigma of the charmer was slowly, tantalizingly, starting to reveal its contours. Eleanor's quest for the charmer led her deeper into the labyrinthine archives of Hollywood history. She spent weeks immersed in the past, her fingers stained with ink from old newspapers, her eyes tired from squinting at microfiche. The Silver Screen Quarterly Library, a treasure trove of forgotten lore, became her second home. She devoured biographies, watched obscure B-movies, and listened to hours of scratchy radio interviews, searching for that elusive spark, that unique resonance that defined the charmer. Her interviews continued, expanding beyond publicists to include retired character actors, costume designers, and even a former studio chef who remembered the charmer's specific order for a late-night snack. Each conversation added another brushstroke to the portrait, yet the face remained tantalizingly out of focus. "He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room," recalled Martha Jenkins, a former script supervisor now in her late 80s, her voice raspy with age but her memory sharp. "Even if he was talking to a studio head, he'd catch your eye, give you a little wink, and you'd feel like you were in on some private joke. He never pulled rank, never made you feel small, just included." Martha described a man who was effortlessly cool, never flustered, even under immense pressure. She recounted a time when a major scene was going disastrously wrong, and the director was on the verge of a breakdown. The charmer, instead of offering advice or taking charge, simply walked over to the director, put a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Hey, pal, looks like you could use a drink. My treat after this mess is over." The simple gesture, devoid of pretense, somehow diffused the tension, allowing everyone to reset. He wasn't a leader in the traditional sense, Martha mused. He was more like a gravitational force. People just naturally gravitated towards his calm, his humor. He made everything feel lighter, easier. Eleanor noted the recurring themes, a disarming wit, a casual elegance, an almost zen-like composure. He was often described as a man who never seemed to take himself too seriously, even when he was at the peak of his fame. This self-effacing quality, Eleanor realized, was a crucial component of his charm. It made him relatable, human, despite his extraordinary appeal. She found a fascinating anecdote from a forgotten gossip column from the early 1960s. It spoke of a major Hollywood party where a notoriously difficult European director was holding court, intimidating everyone with his intellectual pronouncements. The charmer, reportedly, walked up to him, listened patiently for a few minutes, then clapped him on the back and said, "You know, you talk a lot like my Uncle Tony." He also thought he knew everything, but he made a mean spaghetti sauce. The director, initially taken aback, burst into laughter, and the tension in the room dissolved. It was a perfect example of his ability to cut through pretense with humor and a touch of irreverence. His talent, too, was often described as effortless. He could sing, act, and perform with a seemingly casual grace that belied hours of practice or innate skill. He'd just walk onto the stage, microphone in hand, and it was like he was singing in his living room, said a former band member, now a spry 90-year-old jazz musician. No theatrics, no big production. Just him, the song, and that voice. And he'd make it sound so easy, you'd think anyone could do it. But no one could. He had that special something. The musician also spoke of the charmer's deep love for jazz, his appreciation for improvisation, and his respect for fellow artists, regardless of their fame. He wasn't a snob. He simply loved good music and good company. Eleanor began to compile a list of characteristics that, while still not pointing to a name, were narrowing the field. A distinctive, smooth vocal style. A natural comedic timing, often improvisational. A preference for a relaxed, unforced performance style. A reputation for loyalty to friends and colleagues. An aura of nonchalance, almost indifference to fame, which paradoxically amplified it. A known presence in the social scene, but often observed rather than actively participating in the drama. She found a particularly intriguing quote from a forgotten interview with a prominent film critic from the era. He was the eye of the storm. Everything swirled around him, but he remained perfectly still, perfectly composed. His charm wasn't a performance. It was a state of being. The more she learned, the more Eleanor felt a growing sense of connection to this enigmatic figure. She wasn't just reporting on a celebrity. She was trying to understand a phenomenon. The charmer represented a bygone era of Hollywood, an age where charisma was less about manufactured image and more about an intrinsic quality of personality. One afternoon, while sifting through a box of old fan mail addressed to various stars, she found a single and signed letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone specific, but it spoke of the man who made me believe in magic again. The letter described a chance encounter at a restaurant, where the charmer had noticed the writer, a young woman struggling with a personal loss, and had simply offered a kind word and a genuine smile. He didn't know me anything, the letter read. But for a moment, he made me feel seen, truly seen. And that's a gift more precious than any autograph. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. This wasn't just about fame or talent. It was about humanity. The charmer wasn't just a star. He was a source of comfort, a beacon of effortless grace in a world often defined by its harsh realities. The clues were still vague, still contradictory in their lack of specificity, but Eleanor felt the pieces slowly, inexorably, beginning to align. The ghost of Hollywood's golden age was starting to take on a more defined shape, and Eleanor was ready to meet him. As Eleanor delved deeper, the fragmented clues began to coalesce, forming a more coherent, albeit still nameless, image of the charmer. The recurring motif of jazz music became increasingly prominent, not just an appreciation for it, but a deep, almost spiritual connection. Several sources mentioned his preference for late-night jam sessions over glitzy premieres, his quiet reverence for the improvisational genius of musicians, and his own natural rhythm that seemed to flow from a similar wellspring. He didn't just sing jazz, he was jazz, a retired club owner told Eleanor, his eyes misting over. Smooth, cool, a little bit unpredictable, but always hitting the right note. He understood the space between the notes, the unspoken language. That's where his real magic lay. This love for jazz hinted at a personality that valued authenticity and spontaneity over rigid structure. It suggested a man who was comfortable in his own skin, who didn't need to follow a script to be captivating. His style, too, was consistently described as understated yet impeccable. Not flashy, not trend-driven, but classic and timeless. A perfectly tailored suit, a loosened tie, a cigarette held just so. It was an aesthetic of effortless cool, a visual manifestation of his entire persona. Eleanor found an old-fashioned spread from a 1950s magazine, featuring a group of male stars. One figure, again slightly to the side, stood out. He wore a simple dark suit, but the way it hung on him, the casual tilt of his head, the almost imperceptible smirk, spoke volumes. He wasn't trying to be stylish, he simply was. His charm wasn't about what he wore, but how he wore it, with an air of nonchalant confidence that made every other meticulously dressed star look like they were trying too hard. But beneath the cool exterior, a more complex picture began to emerge. Several interviewees, particularly those who had worked closely with him, hinted at a subtle melancholic streak, a quiet introspection that belied his public image as the life of the party. He could make you laugh until your sides hurt, said a former stand-up comedian who had opened for him countless times. But sometimes, after the show, when everyone else was celebrating, he'd just sit quietly, nursing a drink, looking out at nothing in particular. Not sad, exactly, but thoughtful, like he was carrying the weight of the world, but he'd never let it show. This observation resonated deeply with Eleanor. It suggested that the charmer's effortless cool wasn't born of indifference, but perhaps of a profound understanding of life's absurdities and its fleeting joys. His ability to make others feel good might have stemmed from a deeper empathy, a recognition of the struggles beneath the surface. She recalled the letter from the young woman at the restaurant. The charmer hadn't offered platitudes. He had offered genuine connection. This wasn't the act of a superficial charmer, but of someone with a deeper well of understanding. Eleanor began to see the charmer not just as an entertainer, but as a philosopher of sorts, albeit one who expressed his philosophy through a joke, a song, or a perfectly timed pause. His nonchalant approach to fame, which initially seemed like a lack of ambition, now appeared as a deliberate choice, a refusal to be consumed by the superficiality of celebrity, a quiet rebellion against the relentless demands of the spotlight. She found a quote attributed to him in a long-forgotten interview, though the source was vague. "Life's too short to worry about what people think. Just be yourself, have a good time, and try not to hurt anyone." It was a simple philosophy, yet profoundly liberating, and perfectly encapsulated the essence of the charmer. The pieces were now fitting together with an almost unnerving precision. The love for jazz, the distinctive style, the effortless wit, the underlying current of quiet contemplation, the unwavering loyalty to friends, the almost casual brilliance. Eleanor felt a growing excitement, a tingling sensation that she was on the cusp of a major breakthrough. The charmer was no longer a myth. He was a tangible presence, a figure she felt she was beginning to know intimately, even without a name. She spent an entire night listening to old radio broadcasts, specifically variety shows from the 1950s and early 60s. She heard countless voices, but one, in particular, stood out. It was smooth, warm, with a slight, almost imperceptible drawl. It delivered jokes with a perfect deadpan timing, sang with a velvety ease, and bantered with guests with an unforced charm that made every interaction sound like a private conversation. As she listened, a name, a familiar name, began to echo in her mind. It was a name associated with cool, with effortless charm, with a certain kind of laid-back sophistication. But it was also a name often overshadowed by more flamboyant personalities, a name sometimes dismissed as merely the straight man or the crooner. Could it be? Could the man who embodied Hollywood's greatest charm, the one whose essence had eluded definition for so long, be someone so seemingly obvious, yet so profoundly misunderstood? The thought sent a jolt through her. It was so simple, yet so revolutionary. The clues, once vague, now screamed his identity. The jazz, the style, the wit, the subtle melancholy, it all fit. Eleanor closed her eyes, the voice from the radio filling her small office. She pictured the man in the faded photograph, the man in the fashion spread, the man described by Martha Jenkins, and the jazz musician. And for the first time, the face in her mind was clear, distinct, and undeniably familiar. The mystery was about to unravel, and the revelation, she knew, would be astonishing. She was no longer just drawn to the figure. She was captivated, ready to finally put a name to the legend. The final, undeniable piece of the puzzle arrived not in a dusty archive, but in a small, unassuming box of personal effects donated to the Academy Library by the estate of a long-deceased Hollywood publicist. Among the yellowed photographs and brittle correspondence, Eleanor found a slim, leather-bound diary. It wasn't a celebrity's diary, but that of the publicist, a man named George Harrison, no relation to the Beatle, who had worked closely with many of the era's biggest stars. Flipping through the delicate pages, Eleanor's heart pounded. George had a habit of making candid observations about his clients, often with a dry wit. On one particular page, dated October 1957, he wrote, "Dino just walked off set after another one-take wonder. The man is infuriatingly good. Makes it look like he's barely trying. And yet, it's always perfect." The director was tearing his hair out trying to get the leading lady to match his nonchalant brilliance. "She just doesn't get it. You can't act that kind of cool. You either have it or you don't. And Dino, he's got it in spades. Hollywood's greatest charmer, hands down. And he probably doesn't even realize it. Dino. The nickname hit Eleanor with the force of a physical blow. Dino. The pieces clicked into place with a resounding finality. The jazz, the style, the effortless wit, the subtle melancholy, the nonchalant approach to fame, the loyalty to friends, the understated talent. It all pointed to one man, and one man only. Dean Martin. Eleanor gasped, a mixture of shock and exhilaration coursing through her. Dean Martin, the king of cool, the legendary crooner, the comedic foil, the epitome of relaxed sophistication. How could she have missed it? Or rather, how could the industry have so successfully obscured his true essence behind the persona? Her initial reaction was disbelief, followed by a wave of profound understanding. It made perfect, undeniable sense. Dean Martin wasn't just a charmer, he was the charmer. His entire public persona, often dismissed as a carefully constructed act of indifference, was in fact the very manifestation of the elusive quality she had been chasing. She immediately immersed herself in everything Dean Martin. She watched his films with Jerry Lewis, his solo comedies, his variety shows. She listened to his albums, from the early Capitol years to his later reprise recordings. And with each viewing, each listen, the legend of Hollywood's greatest charmer became clearer, more vibrant, and more profoundly human. Dean Martin's charm wasn't about being the loudest or the flashiest. It was about his inherent ease, his self-deprecating humor, his ability to make everyone feel comfortable in his presence. He never seemed to chase fame. It simply gravitated towards him. He was the man who could sing a romantic ballad with such warmth it melted hearts, then immediately follow it with a perfectly timed, dry joke that brought the house down. His cool wasn't a facade, it was a philosophy. When you're hot, you're hot. When you're not, you're not, he famously quipped, embodying a relaxed acceptance of life's ups and downs. He never seemed to sweat the small stuff, or even the big stuff. This nonchalance, far from being a sign of disinterest, was a testament to his inner strength and his refusal to be consumed by the pressures of Hollywood. Eleanor discovered the depth of his loyalty to his friends, particularly Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr., the other members of the Rat Pack. Their camaraderie was legendary, built on genuine affection and mutual respect. Dean Martin was often the anchor, the steady presence, the one who could defuse tension with a perfectly timed quip. She learned about his private life, his devotion to his family, which often stood in stark contrast to his public image as a playboy. He was a man who cherished his home life, who preferred a quiet dinner with his loved ones to a raucous Hollywood party. This duality, the public persona versus the private man, only added to his mystique and, paradoxically, to his charm. He was accessible, yet always held a part of himself back, maintaining an air of intriguing mystery. His wit was legendary, often delivered with a deadpan expression that made it even funnier. He was a master of the one-liner, the perfectly timed retort, the self-deprecating jab that endeared him to audiences. He never needed to be cruel or cutting. His humor was inclusive, inviting you to laugh with him, not at others. The melancholic streak Eleanor had sensed in her research now made perfect sense. Dean Martin, despite his outward joviality, was a deeply private man. He had experienced personal tragedies, including the loss of his son, Dean Paul Martin, in a plane crash. While he rarely spoke of his pain publicly, it undoubtedly shaped his perspective, adding a layer of quiet wisdom to his easygoing demeanor. His ability to find joy and humor amidst life's inevitable sorrows was, in itself, a profound form of charm. Eleanor realized that the reason the charmer had remained nameless for so long was precisely because Dean Martin's charm was so intrinsic, so natural, that it defied easy categorization. It wasn't a skill he honed. It was simply who he was. He didn't do charm, he exuded it. He was the ultimate anti-star, a man who achieved superstardom by simply being himself, in an industry that constantly demanded reinvention. The revelation was not just a journalistic scoop, it was a personal epiphany for Eleanor. She had started her journey looking for a legend, and she had found a man whose effortless cool, genuine warmth, and understated brilliance had made him Hollywood's greatest charmer, a title he likely would have shrugged off with a smile and a "Hey, pal, what's all the fuss about?" The mystery was solved, and the truth was far more captivating than any myth. Eleanor Vance sat at her desk, the final draft of her article, Dean Martin, Hollywood's Greatest Charmer Revealed, glowing on her screen. The journey had been transformative, taking her from a skeptical journalist to an ardent admirer of a man whose legacy, she now understood, was far more profound than the King of Cool moniker often suggested. Her article began by recounting the decades-long mystery of the charmer, then meticulously laid out the clues she had uncovered, culminating in the diary entry that had finally named him. She detailed how Dean Martin's unique blend of effortless talent, disarming wit, and genuine warmth had created an aura that captivated audiences and colleagues alike. She wrote about his cool persona, not as a calculated act, but as an authentic expression of a man who understood the fleeting nature of fame and the importance of living life on his own terms. His self-deprecating humor, his loyalty to friends, his love for family, and his quiet resilience in the face of personal tragedy all contributed to a charm that was deeply human and utterly irresistible. Dean Martin didn't just entertain. He made you feel good about yourself. Eleanor typed, her fingers flying across the keyboard. He was the friend you wished you had, the guy who could make you laugh when you wanted to cry, the embodiment of a relaxed elegance that transcended trends and generations. She reflected on his influence. Dean Martin's charm wasn't just for his era, it was timeless. His music, his films, his television shows continued to resonate, offering a comforting escape, a reminder of a time when charisma felt less manufactured and more intrinsic. He influenced countless performers, not by dictating a style, but by demonstrating the power of authenticity. His legacy was a testament to the idea that true charm comes from within, from a genuine ease with oneself and a generous spirit towards others. Eleanor concluded her article with a powerful statement about the enduring nature of his appeal. In an industry obsessed with reinvention and constant self-promotion, Dean Martin stood as a quiet rebel. He simply was. And in that effortless being, he achieved a level of charm that Hollywood has rarely, if ever, seen since. He taught us that sometimes, the greatest magic lies in simply being yourself, with a smile, a song, and a perfectly timed joke. She leaned back, a sense of accomplishment washing over her. This wasn't just an article, it was a tribute, a reevaluation, a rediscovery. She hoped it would encourage a new generation to look beyond the superficial and appreciate the true depth of Dean Martin's artistry and humanity. As she prepared to submit her piece, Eleanor thought about the readers. She imagined them, perhaps like her, initially skeptical, then slowly drawn into the narrative, finally understanding the profound impact of this extraordinary man. If you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of Hollywood's golden age and the revelation of its greatest charmer, she added as a final thought to her editor, I encourage our readers to subscribe to Silver Screen Quarterly for more untold stories and deep dives into cinematic history. She then considered how to engage her audience further. What are your thoughts on Dean Martin's enduring appeal? Did this article change your perception of the King of Cool? We'd love to hear from you. Please comment below and share your favorite Dean Martin moments or memories. And finally, a simple, direct appeal. If this story resonated with you, if it brought a smile to your face or a new appreciation for a true legend, please hit the like button. Your engagement helps us bring more stories like this to light. Eleanor smiled. The article was complete. The mystery was solved. And in uncovering the identity of Hollywood's greatest charmer, she had not only written a compelling piece of journalism, but had also found a new appreciation for the subtle, powerful magic of Dean Martin. His charm, she realized, was not just a historical footnote. It was a living, breathing legacy, an echo of cool that continued to resonate through the ages. She felt a profound sense of satisfaction, knowing she had done justice to the man who truly was, and forever would be, Hollywood's greatest charmer.